Alex Eala has is obviously that much higher. And his game, and alongside Roger Federer, he actually had
French Open. No, I don't want the first tournament to be a major, so
The 2026 Australian Open logs a single-day attendance record of 101,696 spectators. Alex Eala's pre-tournament press conference pulls over 100,000 live stream views, a number that buries Elkar's Sinner and Sabalenka's streams from that same afternoon. Indian Wells practice sessions start filling up before she even touches a racket. Filipino fans in California, nearly 2 million strong, are already descending on the grounds days before Music, her first scheduled match. Now, here's where the story gets genuinely interesting. The louder Eala's massive viewership numbers got Music, the more urgently Martina Navratilova started going off on Tennis Channel. Music and her frustration had nothing to do with Eala's tennis. It was aimed squarely at tournament organizers who got completely blindsided by a 20-year-old Music with 0 WTA titles, somehow commanding more crowd attention than every established superstar in the draw. Strip away the scheduling debate and what's actually sitting underneath Navratilova's reaction, something far more significant than a logistical complaint. The Alex Eala effect is exposing exactly how unprepared music professional tennis was for a phenomenon built entirely outside its traditional power structure. Subscribe right now because this music channel covers what mainstream tennis commentary won't say directly. What follows breaks down exactly what triggered Navratilova when the numbers started becoming undeniable. And music, what this actually means for women's tennis going forward. Melbourne Park has hosted some of the most electric atmospheres in tennis history. Rod Laver Arena sellouts, fifth set tie-breaks under the lights, Grand Slam finals drawing global audiences in the tens of millions. What happened on Court 6 on January 19, 2026? Didn't music belong in any of those categories on paper? And that's precisely what made it so significant. Alicia Parks ranked 100th in the world versus Alex Eala ranked 49th. A first-round women's singles match on a medium-sized outer court with no seeded players involved. The kind of fixture that typically draws a few hundred curious spectators and clears out within an hour of finishing. Instead, the queue to get inside Court 6 grew so long it physically reached Rod Laver Arena. Security started turning fans away at the gates long before the match began. Hundreds of Filipino supporters, Music, who had traveled specifically to Melbourne, never got through the entrance. Those who made it inside filled every seat, every standing position, every available ledge around the venue. Ben Rothenberg, one of the most respected journalists covering the sport, flagged the problem the moment the order of play was published that morning, calling the court assignment unwise before a single ball had been struck. Jose Morgado was considerably less diplomatic, describing the decision as flat-out dumb. Their frustration wasn't directed at Eala, it was directed at a tournament infrastructure that had completely failed to account for the demographic reality sitting right in its own city. Melbourne's Filipino community is one of the largest in Australia. Putting a player who had become a national icon for that entire community onto a court built for a few hundred spectators wasn't just a logistical miscalculation. Music, it was a fundamental failure to read the room. By the time Martina Navratilova sat down for the post-match Tennis Channel discussion, footage from outside Court 6 had already been circulating across social media for hours. Fans pressed against barriers, long lines disappearing into the distance, Philippine flags visible from every angle. The images told a music story that required no additional context. Navratilova didn't approach it gently. Her message to the organizers was direct. The organizers need to keep more in mind where the players are from and what the actual fan base is here. There's a massive Filipino audience in Melbourne in Australia, so keep that in mind next time you make the schedule. That statement carries weight well beyond its surface. Meaning Navratilova has spent decades as one of professional tennis's most credible analytical music voices. She doesn't typically use live broadcast time to publicly call music out. Grand Slam organizers over scheduling decisions. The fact that Music chose to do exactly that, specifically over crowd chaos surrounding a player who had just lost her first-round match, signals how genuinely jarring the situation was to someone with her experience Music inside the sport. Lindsay Davenport reinforced the point from a different angle. The 1999 Wimbledon champion argued that Eala should have been placed on a bigger show court from the outset, describing her as probably the most famous female athlete from the Philippines and among the most recognizable sporting figures in that country's entire history. Davenport's framing Music was critical rather than celebratory. She was building a case for why the scheduling decision represented a failure of basic preparation. What neither of them said directly, but Music what sat clearly underneath both assessments, is this. Professional tennis's music scheduling model prioritizes rankings and seedings above everything else. Eala was ranked 49th. Under that model, Court 6 was a defensible decision. The problem is that the model has no variable for cultural significance, diaspora, loyalty, or the kind of generational pride that turns a first-round match into a community event. Alicia Music Parks won the match, 0-6, 6-2-3, 6-2-2. She was the better player on the day. Composed music in the second and third sets after a shaky opening, and the result was deserved. Parks admitted the atmosphere unsettled her early. I was just so focused on the crowd in the first set, she said, which is why it went the way it went. The crowd behavior itself became a secondary debate. Some spectators were audibly celebrating Parks' unforced errors, a breach of tennis etiquette that drew criticism from multiple directions. Filipino fans pushed back, arguing their manner of support reflected music, their culture's way of showing up for one of their own. That etiquette conversation faded relatively quickly. What didn't fade were the numbers attached to what happened after the match ended. Eala's post-match music press conference drew over 100,000 live stream viewers. Tennis.com independently confirmed her pre-tournament press conference footage had music already reached 6F figure view counts before the match was even played. These figures didn't just outperform other first-round losers, they outperformed the tournament's top seeds and defending champions on the same day. That data point transformed the conversation from a scheduling complaint into something analysts couldn't dismiss. Crowd attendance can be explained by geographic concentration. Melbourne has a large Filipino population, so the turnout could be framed as locally specific. Live stream viewership doesn't have that explanation available. Those music 100,000 viewers were watching from wherever they happened to be located across the globe. Choosing Eala's press conference over every other option the tournament was simultaneously offering. The Eala effect at its core is a global phenomenon, wearing local music clothing at each individual tournament it touches. Once the Australian Open footage reached a wide audience, the commentary stopped being about logistics and started being about cultural scale. Jeannie Boussard, former world number 5, was asked on a live tennis channel broadcast whether she had ever witnessed a female athlete commanding this kind of devoted following. Her immediate answer was Taylor Swift, not used loosely, but as the only contemporary reference point that matched what the numbers were describing. She then drew a historically grounded parallel with Sonia Mirza, who, during her peak years, mobilized Indian tennis fans across multiple continents. Her conclusion was that Eala's ceiling appeared considerably higher than even that precedent based on what was already visible at age 20. Music. Sky Sports tennis presenter Gigi Selman used identical language independently, describing Eala's Dubai crowd as feeling like a Taylor music Swift concert with an atmosphere completely detached from the competitive significance of the match. Salmon went further, suggesting music that in terms of raw crowd appeal, Eala might already be the biggest star in women's tennis, regardless of her ranking. Kim Kerrs brought the most psychologically grounded perspective. The 4-time Grand Slam champion compared to existence in the Philippines to Michael Jordan at the height of his cultural reach, and specifically focused on the burden attached to that territory rather than the privilege. Opponents were already studying her patterns more closely. Expectations from an entire nation were arriving before every match. Managing that level of scrutiny, Clesters noted, requires as much growth off music the court as on it. The Australian Open wasn't a one-off. Every tournament that followed added another layer. At the Abu Dhabi Open in February 2026, Eala came back from a match music point down against Alexandra Sasnovich to win $266,476. Australian professional Daria Saville, watching courtside music, said publicly that if she were a tournament director, she would do anything to have Eala at her event. That quote from a fellow active player, not a broadcaster, music, or analyst, captured exactly how significantly the dynamic around Eala had shifted within the sports own community. Dubai followed, and the WTA Tour finally adjusted. Eala was placed last on center court on February 17, the scheduling position reserved for the match with the highest expected audience. She defeated world number 8 Jasmine Music Polini in the round of 32 before losing to Coco Gauff in the quarterfinals. During Thought Music Dubai Week, Gauff was seen publicly telling Eala's fans she would be out on the adjacent court soon. The world music number for managing crowd expectations attached to a player ranked considerably below music her in the standings at Indian Wells. Right now, Christopher Eubanks addressed music crowd safety on air, in direct connection with Eala's scheduling, referencing Melbourne music specifically and calling for organizers to get her onto a court large enough to handle what's coming. The BNP Open's own social media accounts started posting her practice session footage. Because the filled stands were generating attention the tournament wanted to be associated with rather than caught flat-footed by. Professional tennis has spent decades operating on a straightforward music principle. Competitive achievement determines visibility. Win titles, climb music rankings, earn the show court. Alex Jelic sits at world number 32 with 0 WTA titles. Under every music conventional metric the sport uses to allocate attention, she should be generating moderate interest on secondary courts at mid-tier events. Instead, she is the subject of public statements from Navratilova, Davenport, Music Jovovich, Pagula, Clesters, Busher, and Eubank, each grappling with the same underlying reality from a different angle. The massive music viewership she generates, the overflowing outer courts, the press conference live streams that bury defending champions, none of it fits the existing model. The sports institutions are visibly recalibrating in real time, without a clear framework for what they're recalibrating toward. Martina Navratilova going off on Tennis Channel in January was the loudest public acknowledgement that the existing framework had already broken down. What happens at Indian Wells Music over the next 2 weeks will either confirm that the tour has genuinely learned from Melbourne, or reveal that the miscalculation runs music considerably deeper than one scheduling decision on one day. Either way, the Eala effect has permanently changed the conversation about how professional tennis measures a player's value to the sport, and that conversation isn't going anywhere. If this gave you a perspective worth sitting with, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. The Filipino contingent is already inside Indian Wells. The draw is underway, and this story has considerably more left to show. Every breakdown on this channel goes exactly where the comfortable music analysis stops. And right now, that's where the most important story in women's tennis is unfolding.